Hi, I'm Harry Stegall, and with me is retired Sergeant Mike Humphrey from the North Carolina Highway Patrol. Let me give you just a brief background of our relationship. Mike is one of the 3 troopers that captured a man that shot me on a traffic stop 7 times and left me for dead in October of 1975. Through the years, we have talked to different law enforcement agencies and officers about officer survival and officer safety. This segment will deal with what I call the nevers. You never know who is in the vehicle that you're about to stop, and you never know who's in the house when you're maybe having a confrontation with someone out in the front yard or on the sidewalk or in the parking lot. You never know who else is around. You also never know how fast a situation can turn ugly. But when it does, the third never comes into play. You never give up. So, Mike, let's get started and you tell us about the situation on Interstate 95.
I hate to use the word routine because we have discussed that word regularly, but for lack of better verbiage, that was a routine traffic stop, just a speeding vehicle northbound I-95, I think 68 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. Noticed that there was 4 black males in the vehicle. Crossed the median, turned around, stopped the vehicle. As I approached the vehicle, I noticed that all of the passengers turned and looked towards me, which alarmed me a little bit, but there was no aggressive action. So I approached the vehicle. I did never go to the passenger area, to the driver. I just asked the driver if he would step out, please. He stepped out. I asked him to come back to the side of the road with me. He did. He presented a driver's license. I told him I stopped him speeding. Told him why, the speed that he was running. At that time, I never searched him and never patted him down. He didn't appear to be a threat. Everything seemed normal. Did not identify the tag. We didn't have the capabilities at that time to run it that readily. So I asked him to have a seat in the car with me. I actually had a nice conversation with him, speeding ticket for 68 to 55 mile per hour zone. Thanked him. He thanked me actually. He got back in the car and he drove away really uneventfully. About 2 days later, I got a call to meet with someone at our district office, which turned out to be 2 FBI agents. The FBI agents asked me, did I recall stopping a specific type of vehicle on I-95 2 days prior to that. And I said, of course, that I did, and asked me to retrieve any notes that I had, and I did. So he began to tell me that that vehicle later had been stopped, and all 4 of the occupants were apprehended and charged with robbing a bank in Georgia. What had happened, we found out, was that they backtracked through his citations and different other things, trying to establish a timeline where he'd been to tie him back to Georgia. When they found the citation, of course, they naturally came to me and wanted to know what I recalled about it. And I told him that it had been very uneventful. It wasn't a speeding ticket. That there was very little noticeable action out of the passenger or the driver. Nobody seemed very nervous. Just seemed very routine. In actuality, what had happened, he and those 3 occupants had robbed a bank in Georgia. And they were traveling north. I don't recall where they were going, but it turned out that they had the money and the firearms in the car. It turns also out in the conversation interrogation that they asked why the officer did not take any action when the speeding ticket was written. And of course we found out that there was no warning at the time to be on the lookout for that vehicle. There had been any broadcast of a vehicle northbound in North Carolina where it fit that description. So naturally I did not have that information. What we also found out was that the driver of the vehicle, when everyone started talking to him and telling him that there was a law enforcement officer behind him with a blue light on, and they thought they were all captured, the driver apparently was streetwise, for lack of a better word, and he said, no, I don't believe he knows who we are because he's by himself and he's not talking on the radio and he's too casual. So just sit here, don't move, be still, and don't do anything unless he handcuffs me. If he handcuffs me, you'll know we're made, and then I'm not going, and you got to save me. So if he just sits me down, doesn't handcuff me, and looks like he's writing a ticket or having a conversation and releases me, we're going to be cool, we're going to drive off, everything will be fine, which is in actuality what happened. Now, if I'd have been thorough, I might have patted him down or frisked him. I did not, because I didn't feel threatened, and I should have, but I did not. Bad news is, if I had, they would have interpreted that as an arrest, and then they may have gotten out, and the situation would probably have been fatal for me. So, again, nothing is routine, even though you may think it is, and even though the threat doesn't appear obvious, that it obviously was one. And it was just by the grace of God, I suppose, that that was not my day.
Well, that's a perfect example of how you never know who's in an automobile. I mean, there's 4 bank robbers, and they obviously had the weapons, and they had the means, and you just didn't say the magic words to alarm them and cause them to react. That would have probably caused your death. So, Mike, there's another situation that hits home that we'll talk about here, and that is how fast a situation can turn bad, and what you go through when that situation is turning bad, what your mindset is, and the fact that you never give up.
Exactly.
So tell us about that.
This particular situation, I was a very, very young trooper. I graduated from our basic school in April of 1974, and I received 6 weeks of on-the-job training, which probably carried me to June. So I'd actually been what we call a solo trooper from June to February. So my experience at that time was very limited. I made a routine traffic stop, which was in February during a weeknight. A vehicle that I observed presenting something indicative of a driving under influence. And I remember clearly thinking, not on Wednesday night, not Wednesday night, it's not going to be, but as I approached and got closer, the driving habits were consistent, so I made the traffic stop. So many things about that I remember clearly. I remember exactly where it was. I remember the make, model, and color of the vehicle. It was a 1963 Buick Special. It was green. It's a 2-door, and it was occupied by 2 black males. I asked the driver out. Again, nothing alarmed me. Just at that time, they called it driving under influence. When this gentleman stepped out, his size and his demeanor was, to be honest with you, was intimidating. He was larger than I was. He appeared to be quite stronger than I was. But what struck me most about him was that he had absolutely no concern in his expression or his words. He had absolutely no concern about the fact that he was being stopped and he was drinking, and that it was extremely cold and he was wearing a sleeveless shirt. And that struck me as odd. And all these things failed to register with me that there's something about this individual. If he's not scared, if he's not frightened about being stopped, if he's not worried about it, that should have told me his demeanor was not going to be one that was going to be cooperative. As the conversation went on, I, of course, made the opinion I was going to place him under arrest. I told him that I needed to do so, and I was going to take him to Red Springs, North Carolina, for the purpose of a breathalyzer test. And at that time, you could, if they were cooperative enough and had someone to come down and sign a bond, they could quite possibly not go to jail. They could just take the breathalyzer test, receive the paperwork, make bond, and then appear in court later. So that was my bargaining chip with him, because he was not being cooperative. So I was trying to stress to him that if he would cooperate with me and just ride with me to the police station, he could take the test and someone could come pick him up. Well, he absolutely did not want to cooperate. And he never argued, he never got aggressive, he never got combative. He was just bland in his demeanor and his attitude. But the more we talked, the more he became a little angry. And I sensed that he was getting angry. And I'm thinking that maybe I can talk this man out of this, because he's large and I really don't want to fight with this guy. And there's 2 of them. The passenger kept getting out of the vehicle and was yelling something that I couldn't understand, and I would order him back in and he'd get in. And this went on several times, which again I should have been getting extremely alarmed.
Is this where the OODA loop would come into play?
Exactly, and that's where I was headed with this. At the time, we did not have training about that. We didn't have knowledge of that. And for those of you that don't know, the OODA loop is something an officer gets caught into when he just keeps giving commands and keeps making requests, and he keeps making directives, and no one follows and no one obeys, and often just keep repeating this vicious cycle. And what happens when you fail to orient, or you fail to observe, fail to orient, fail to decide, fail to act. And what happens a lot of times is that the violator gets stronger with that sense that the officer is weak. Well, when they get stronger, he feels that the officer is weaker. So, and I think that's what's happening here. This guy began to realize that maybe I was afraid to confront him and afraid to fight him. Again, I knew there was no help available. And I also knew that I was a young trooper, and I'm ashamed to admit, but I felt like that I didn't want to call for any assistance because I felt like I needed to prove myself to other officers that, I can take care of business. And so I was a little hesitant to call. And another thing, if I did call for help, it was going to take 15 to 20 minutes to get some help. So we were going to wind up talking anyway. So at some point in time, I realized that talking was not going to work, so I decided a different tactic. And I said, well, why do you not want to go with me? He said, well, I don't want my car left on this road. And I said, sir, it's not a problem. I'll let this gentleman up here drive. No, sir, nobody's driving my car. I said, not a problem. We'll get someone to tow it. No, sir, nobody's towing my car. I said, well, we'll just leave it parked and locked up. No, I'm not doing that. I'm driving it home. I said, no, sir, you're not driving it home.
So you're doing everything you can possibly do to get this man to come along with you peacefully without using any kind of force.
Exactly. Even went so far as to tell him that if he would go with me, I would be prepared to tell the magistrate he was cooperative, and I would encourage the magistrate to let someone sign his bond and take him home. Because actually he was about a half a mile from his home. We could really see the light to his home across the field, and he kept directing me to that. He said, I just need to go there. I said, I can't let you do that. So actually I tried every tactic that I knew to get him to cooperate with me without a struggle. Because I really believed that there was going to be a struggle that was going to be really ugly. Now I don't want to go as far as to say I was afraid of the guy, or I would have let him go if I was afraid of him, but I did not want to fight with this guy because he was a pretty healthy fellow.
And there was another occupant in the vehicle too.
And he was semi-compliant, so I had to worry about what's going to happen if we get engaged in a confrontation. What's this guy's situation going to be? What stance is he going to take? Is he going to stand by? Is he going to help me? Is he going to be sympathetic to the violator? What's his relationship? What's he going to do?
Exactly.
So I'm trying to negotiate with this fellow to convince him to go along cooperatively, but he's not going to happen. At some point in time, I realized I've got to take some action. So what I did tactfully and casually, I just slipped my flashlight in my back pocket. At that time, we were not issued any impact weapons. Our flashlight could suffice as an impact weapon, but it was not going to be sufficient, and I knew that. Fortunately, I had purchased a blackjack. None were issued, but I purchased one, and there was no problem with having it, and there was no policies against using it. The one I bought was hefty, it weighed a pound, and so I casually slipped my flashlight in my pocket. I bladed my body. I took him by his right arm, by his bicep. At the same time, I already had my hand on my blackjack and actually had it down by my lower leg, and he did not see it. So when I took him by the arm to pull him towards me, he snatched away from me quite aggressively. When he snatched away, I just immediately swung the blackjack. Well, luckily, I hit him right between the eyes. And as soon as impact was made, he just collapsed, and he fell back on the trunk of the car, and he just started to slide down the bumper. Well, my inexperience and my relief that I had conquered this situation, and inexperience, I put the blackjack back in the pocket. I took my eyes off of him. I reached for my handcuffs, and when I came around with my handcuffs, he had stood up. And he literally growled at me, and he reached across and picked me up under my arms and swung me around and set me in the highway and started shaking me like a child. Well, I regained the handcuffs, of course, went to the ground. I regained the blackjack, and I started striking him again. And we fought. It seemed like a long time, which might not have been 2 or 3 minutes, but I know we fought some standing up, we fought some on the ground, some on the hood, some on the trunk. Finally, we went to the ground, and I remember being on my back, and the grass was wet, and I could see under his car, I could see the shackles and the muffler and the gas tank and the dirty part of the undercarriage. And I'm lying on the grass, I'm smelling that exhaust, and this large, angry man's on top of me telling me he's going to kill me. And I had just found out that my wife was pregnant, and she was expecting in October. And this is happening in February, so this is early in the pregnancy. And I'm thinking at that point in time, I said, I'm not going out like this. I'm better than this, and this is not happening. And I've got to get on my feet. I've got to get back on my feet and on top somehow. So somehow I found the strength to continue to struggle, and through some of the training we received about some ground fighting, I was able to get on top of him. Well, I still had my blackjack. But when I regained the position of being on top, I continued to strike him. And then this one, the passenger gets out, and he approaches, and I see him from the corner of my eye, and he hollers and yells some obscenities, but I don't understand what he's saying. It's almost like it's muffled, and it's like all my vision's kind of narrowed down, and he's a blur. But I'm aware that he's there, and I don't know what he's going to do. I do know that this time my flashlight's on the ground, and so are my handcuffs. I'm continuing to try to hit this guy. During this time, I am not aware that he has quit trying to block the blows and quit trying to strike back, but has reached across for my weapon. And when I became aware, he was actually tugging on the entire holster. Well, my holster at that time was one that slipped over the belt, as we talked about. It didn't have snaps, so it was not going to break off of the belt. But he pulled it hard enough that it would jerk my hip around. And then I became aware of what he was doing, so I dropped the blackjack. And as the gun, how it happened quite by accident, because he didn't know how to manipulate the holster, I'm sure, but the snap came undone, the gun came out of the holster. And I remember seeing the silver nickel-plated .357 Magnum in the headlights, shining, and he had the gun by the handle, and his hand around the handle, and he had to actually manipulate a little bit till he got it in a shooting position. Not by training and not by knowledge, just by the grace of God. When I grabbed the gun, my hand went across the hammer and the cylinder in the top of the gun, and it prevented him from pulling the trigger. At this time, the passenger is standing over us, and I'm keenly aware that laying on the ground, and now it's my flashlight, now it's my blackjack, and now it's my handcuffs. And between the two of them, they could easily overpower me, particularly if he started striking. But he never engaged. So as we struggled over the gun, we ultimately got to our knees, and we were facing one another on our knees. He had the gun in my stomach, in my ribs, shoving it in my ribs, and I still had the barrel. And I remember telling him, I remember my whole life, I could see my wife, I could see the pregnancy, I could see the baby, I could see my mom, my father, I could see my family, my co-workers. I said, my whole life virtually, in a second. I've never been that afraid of my life ever again, I don't think. But I just remember thinking, I can't go this way. So I began to try to think, how can I get out of this situation? How can I remedy this? Can I shove the gun in the dirt? Can I turn the gun away and let him fire it himself? Can I get control and fire it 6 times so we're back on equal ground? Can I get the gun and throw it away? Should I break away and run? All these things were going through my mind. I knew from experience from a former trooper being killed that running away was probably not going to be an option because we were too close, and he would probably get some rounds off at me. So I don't know how I found the strength, but I remember thinking, I've got to get out of this, and I'm not giving up, and this is not happening to me. So I took the barrel, and with my right hand, and I had a little leverage, and I turned the gun back towards him. Well, luckily, by me having the leverage in the gun barrel, the handle was slick with blood, it began to slip in his hand. So when I turned it towards him, my theory was I'll let go of the hammer and the cylinder, maybe it'll fire, and he'll shoot himself. But as I turned the gun towards him, apparently he realized what was happening, so he began to scramble. And as I was regaining control of the gun, he was getting to his feet, so I came up with him, and now I have the gun by the handle, but he is behind me, standing up, with his arms around me, holding my hands. And he has actually lifted me off the ground. And I said, if you give me the gun back, I'll let you go home. And he said, I asked you to let me go home, you wasn't going to do it, I'm going to kill you, you son of a bitch. And I said, well, this ain't over yet, but it's better than it was. So I began to feel him weaken a little bit. And as I felt him kind of sag and my feet kept down on the ground, I realized he was weakening, and I was pretty sure it was not from being exhausted. I thought maybe it was from a loss of blood, because he was pretty severely injured. As I felt his grip loosen, I just took a large step forward and snatched the gun away and turned around and stepped back. And when I stepped back, I now had maybe 3 to 4 feet, 5 feet between us. I stepped back 2 more feet, maybe another step. I pointed the gun at a button on his shirt, a white button. I remember right in his sternum. And I said, get down on the ground. And he growled like an animal, and he took a step towards me. And I backed up again, and I cocked the pistol, and I remember clearly thinking, how can I justify shooting this man now that I've gotten the gun back and that I've beat him this badly? How am I going to justify shooting him? But as I cocked the gun and aimed at the button, he collapsed to the ground. So I went over, holstered a gun, I went over and handcuffed him. And he still was not unconscious, but he was semi-conscious. When I began to handcuff him, he tried to arouse up and start struggling again, so took some more measures to control him. After getting him under control and getting him in the car and retrieving my flashlight and my blackjack, this gentleman that had been previously trying to engage came around from the front of the car, and I suppose he was hiding because he saw the weapon at that point in time, and maybe he saw me get it back, maybe he thought I was in charge of the situation. So he concealed himself, but when I came back by myself, then he engaged, and he wanted to argue, he wanted to confront. And at the time, there was a public drunk law, public drunk vehicle, and that was my intent to arrest him for that, because I couldn't leave him out there. And he'd already tried to insert himself in that. I knew there was trouble. But he was much smaller, and I really felt like that I could manage this one better. But as we began to struggle, I could not hold on to his jacket because he had a very large insulated parka on.
Right.
And I couldn't hold on to it. My hand was wet with blood, so I grabbed him, he snatched away. I took a swing with my hand, my fist. I just brushed his chin, not enough to hurt him, not enough to knock him down, but it made him stagger. And he caught his foot on the edge of the pavement, and he continued to stagger, and as he staggered into the highway, an oncoming car ran over him and killed him, and did not stop. The gentleman that I'd been arresting and fighting with witnessed all of this. So in his mind, I had thrown him in front of traffic. The car did not stop. I think probably this gentleman that didn't stop may have thought he was going over me, I don't know. Or maybe he had other reasons for not stopping. It could have been any number of violations that he didn't want to stop.
He was never found.
Never found, never found. I remember the car, I remember what kind it was, but never found it. And I was not in a position to pursue it. I mean, I luckily was not injured, but the other fellow was severely injured. I do not how he remain conscious, but he did. So now I had this gentleman that was bleeding severely and injured and combative, still combative, and this other suspect lying in the road dead with a hit-and-run vehicle. So I'm a trooper with 6 months on the road, and I really don't know what to do right now. You know?
Wow, that's an unbelievable story about how things turn so ugly so fast. Mm-hmm. But I guess the best part about this is that you kept your wits about you, because you described how you relied on your training and how you relied on the leverage, and how you relied on the fact that you were trying to twist your body into position where you could regain your stature and get control of the suspect, rather than just rolling over and saying, "I quit," which, you know, we hope officers won't do that.
Well, we hope not. I think one of the things and I look back in reality, in hindsight, that was probably one of the best things that could happen to me, because it changed my entire mindset on how I dealt with motorists that were not compliant. There's a point that you reach that you're obviously not going to comply, so we're not going to stand here and beg each other. You're not going to beg me to let you go, I'm not going to beg you to go with me. You're under arrest. You know, my job is to take you. So it taught me early to recognize those signs and to not let that happen again. And it's a really good lesson.
And nobody knew who the OODA loop was then, did they?
No, they didn't know anything about the OODA loop, and I didn't know. If I'd known, I'd probably be a wealthy man. But exactly, that's what that was. I observed, but I didn't orient, I didn't decide, I didn't act. And I gave him strength. I gave him strength. He obviously was intending to kill me, and I knew that, and I didn't. I just decided that it was not going to happen that way. And
that's an amazing story. Mike, I thank you for sharing that with us, and I hope that you young officers that have the opportunity to see this will realize that situations do turn ugly, and that you do have to have the will to survive and to win. Thank you.
Exactly.